Okay. So I think what we're going to do, I'll just show you kind of our rough agenda for today. And I'll just quickly share my screen here as quickly as my screen can be shared because my computer is ancient and slow. So hopefully, okay, so fantastic. Okay, so welcome everyone. The session today for our Discovering Your Future Health and Healthcare series is featuring the occupation of veterinarian. We have some fantastic guests with us today to speak about both the program as well as the occupation itself. So we have Dr. Clark here who's going to speak about the program, as well as Heather Manville. And both Dr. Clark and Dr. Chisholm will be sharing their experiences as vets in the field. So we're really pleased to have everyone join us today. We're gonna, as I said, share information about the academic program and go on to mentor sharing experience. And things may sort of shift as we go. Our guests may have sort of a different agenda in mind, but roll with it. It'll all be great. I know that we're gonna have some great information that we're gonna hear today. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to our guest speakers to get started. And you should be able to share your screen. Everything should be good, I hope. Fingers crossed.
Well, thank you very much. So as Heather's going to share her screen there. So my name is Dr. Chris Clark. I'm the Associate Dean at the Western College of Veterinary Medicine in Saskatoon. I'm also a large animal practitioner. Heather, did you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Heather Mandeville. I'm the manager of admissions and recruitment. So I do a lot of advising work with pre-vet students as they're going through their pre-vet years, any questions about anything really. And then I run or set up a lot of the admission system, so the interviews and that sort of thing, and work right up with students until the point basically that they're admitted into the college, and then we hand you over to a student services office. So yeah, that's about it.
So Heather, we're actually seeing the presenter mode rather than the sort of display mode.
Are we? Okay.
So yeah, I can see like any notes and the next slide kind of thing. So if you hit that's it, I think. Oh, no, it's still. Oh, there we go. Perfect. That's perfect. All right. Thank you. All right. So we could have the next slide, Heather, and I'll make a start.
Perfect.
Okay. So first thing, a little bit about the Vet College in Saskatoon. So you may or may not be aware of this, but I'll kind of give you a little bit of the history of the college because it'll explain where we come from a bit better. So back in about right after the Second World War, pretty much, sorry, after the First World War, Western Canada recognized that it needed veterinarians. And at that point, the 4 Western provinces were fairly low in population, but there was a lot of farming going on. And so they got together and started the discussion about building one vet school for Western Canada. So it was a good idea, but unfortunately then the Great Depression came, then the Second World War came, and they didn't really get themselves organized until the late 50s. But they stuck with that plan. So in the early 60s, they solidified their plan that they were going to build one vet school for Western Canada. Now, great deal of discussion about where it would be. And no offense to anybody from Manitoba, but it really came down to either being in Edmonton or Saskatoon. And I really can't explain the political shenanigans, but it ended up in Saskatoon. So we are the Western College of Veterinary Medicine because we serve Western Canada. So while we're at the University of Saskatchewan, we're not of the University of Saskatchewan is the way I like to see it. So we are Manitoba's vet school. We just happen to be in a different province. So for the last basically 60 years, we have served Western Canada, taking students from the 4 Western provinces. Been a little bit of a change in the last couple of years. We now have Alberta withdrawing from our funding agreement, but we still serve British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and we also serve the territories. So the vet school was established to provide veterinarians for Western Canada. It's still our primary function. It's right there in our mission statement. We provide education. So the number one thing we do is educate young veterinarians for practice in Western Canada. And as I'm going to show you some data, I think we do a really good job of that. In addition to that, we act as a center of veterinary expertise What do I mean by that? Well, we certainly, we run a full service referral hospital in Saskatoon that has facilities that you really can't find anywhere else in Western Canada. So we have animals coming to us. Certainly here in Winnipeg, you've got more and more specialities coming online, but we still see animals coming from Winnipeg to Saskatoon for specialist care. We also nowadays, I think we're all getting better at telemedicine. We work with veterinarians and provide resources for veterinarians. We consult on cases on a regular basis and provide support at long distance. We provide diagnostic services. And then finally, we're a center of research. And the vet school has done some spectacular research over the last 60 years, particularly in the fields of vaccination, animal reproduction, and that sort of thing. So again, that research is largely focused on the demands of Western Canada. So I want to stress again that if you desire to be a veterinarian, yes, you may have to move to Saskatoon, but you're actually going to Manitoba's vet school. You're not going to somewhere else. You're not kind of leaving your home province. You're just sort of doing a sort of a slight distance education program there. Heather, if I could have the next slide. So, I mean, you know, the fact that you're here means that you're interested potentially in a career about veterinary medicine. And I think Dr. Chisholm and I are going to give you our sense of where our career paths have taken us. I think we know from studies that most people who want to be veterinarians choose to be veterinarians when they're quite young. And they typically decide because they have observed a veterinarian working. And so their model of what a veterinarian is often quite limited by their exposure. So just want to go through a little bit about some career opportunities here. So we know, looking at our students, that 80% of them, when they graduate, will end up in some form of private practice. So they will be working as a practitioner in a city, a town, or a village, whatever. And they will be working either in some form of companion animal practice, where we generally mean dogs, cats, and all the sort of variety of exotic pets that are out there, which are way too many to list. They could be in food animal practice, which tends to be fairly specific. So you may be doing cattle, you could be doing dairy cows or beef cattle, you could be doing swine, could be doing poultry. There are some other things there. You'll notice I didn't mention horses yet, because horses are the one that don't really fit anywhere. They're not really agricultural, they're not really food animals. We tend to lump them with the companion animals because they tend to be looked after individually, but it tends to be separate from the dog and the cat work. And then finally, in a rural area, you may still be a mixed animal practitioner where you basically deal with everything, you know, which is used to be the model that most veterinarians were, but now is actually less common for somebody to be doing absolutely everything. Even in a mixed animal practice, you often get veterinarians that have areas of interest. So the number of people who can literally go from treating a cow to treating a horse to treating a dog is perhaps less common than it used to be. Heather, if I could have the next slide. So one of the things that I mentioned already is we have an incredible hospital at the Vet College in Saskatoon. And it's an incredibly busy hospital, and it is the basis by which we finished our undergraduate's education. So our vet students will all end up working in that hospital for a year to complete their education. As I mentioned, it's incredibly busy. Our small animal clinic, which is the dogs, the cats, and the exotics, sees in excess of 15,000 animals per year. And that is a complete mixture of first opinion cases, everything from vaccines to animals that got sick that day and need to be seen, to referral cases that come in on a plane. So, you know, the spectrum of cases is incredibly diverse. We have a large animal clinic. We see about 1,500 animals per year there. Most of those animals that are coming into the hospital nowadays are horses. We do still see some sort of acreage animals and things like that, and some very high value animals coming in on the food animal side. And then we have an incredibly busy field service. We actually have 8 vehicles that are on the road every day, and they're going out to the surrounding farms. We've sort of split our field service into 2 halves. So we have a food animal service and an equine service. So the equine service is obviously dealing with the horses, the food animal service, dairy, beef, little bit of swine, some sheep and goats, things like that. So they do about 3,500 calls a year, which means they see in excess of 30,000 animals. Because when you go to a cow farm, you don't just see one animal, you see multiples. We have incredible facilities there. As I mentioned already, we have facilities there you won't find anywhere else in Western Canada. We have CT, we have MRI, we have cancer therapy, we have some incredible surgical facilities. We have an equine performance center. We have small animal and equine intensive care units. Pretty much everything we need for service in Western Canada, because it's too far to go take those animals anywhere else. So we have to be able to do everything in-house. Thanks, Heather. So a little bit about how our program works. So we're actually in the process right now of a renewal of our curriculum. So what I'm going to give you a sense of basically how our curriculum works. So year one is basically how the healthy body works. So year one is very much focused on anatomy and physiology, biochemistry, and the understanding of how the healthy animal body works in the common species. Later alongside of that, we have a brand new program in clinical skills education. So we'll be teaching you hands-on skills that veterinarians need in multiple species. The great advantage of this, and I'm sure Bronwyn is probably thinking that she would have loved this at the time, but when you're learning about the anatomy of the thorax, you're learning about the physiology of the heart and the lungs, and you're learning how to evaluate the chest of the animal. So we've really tried to integrate our program so that it makes more sense. Year two is much more about how the body goes wrong. So it's understanding pathology and disease, as well as understanding the beginnings of how we manage disease through drugs and surgery. Year three is very much how you actually fix things. So year three focuses on a solid foundation in medicine and surgery and reproduction while continuing to enhance your clinical skills. And then year four, we actually put everything into practice. So year four, our students spend their fourth year working in the hospital, doing clinical rotations, some of which are core that you have to take, a portion of which are elective. So you get to pick rotations that align with your professional interests. We have some exchange programs with practices in Western Canada and beyond. We have some exchange programs with other countries. So there's some real opportunity to do things that really align with your interests. And for those who are interested, we also have summer research programs. So if research is something that interests you, there's an opportunity to actually get some research done during your summer breaks. Thanks, Heather. Doesn't really apply this year because with COVID, this doesn't work, but we have an incredibly diverse student body because we have students from across Western Canada. So we have students from the Ontario border, we have students from Vancouver Island, we have students from the territories, wide variety of professional interests, wide variety of interests outside of that. So our students have a pretty diverse group of clubs in the vet school that students really enjoy in years other than this year. So there's always someone who has similar interests to you in terms of veterinary medicine or things outside of veterinary medicine. I'll be honest, our students tend to stay pretty insular at the vet school. They don't interact with the broader university, but there are all the university clubs beyond that as well. So all sorts of opportunities there to engage outside of the classroom as well. Thanks, Heather. Just a little bit, I mean, obviously you guys, you know what it's like to be on a campus university here at the U of M. U of S, I think, is somewhat similar. It's a moderate sized university, very, very diverse campus. We have probably more colleges than almost anywhere else in Canada. So, you know, we have medicine, nursing, dentistry, physiotherapy, law, education, arts and science, engineering, agriculture, everything is on one campus. So there's a lot of diversity there. Some very interesting things there. We have the Canadian light source. If you've been watching the news, you'll know that one of Canada's COVID vaccines was developed at the U of S at Intervac, which actually grew out of the vet school. It's actually still technically part of the vet school. We have a toxicology center. Overall, there's about 25,000 students at the U of S. And the U of S is actually situated pretty much in the city of Saskatoon. It's literally right across the river from downtown. It's not that far away. And Saskatoon itself is quite a bit smaller than Winnipeg. So Saskatoon probably has a population of somewhere in the region of about 250,000. So a much smaller, much tighter city, but still, because it's the only place between Winnipeg and Calgary, it has all the resources you'd actually expect in a much bigger city. So I've lived here for 25 years. I really like Saskatoon. I think it's a pretty neat place to live, to be honest with you. Thanks, Heather. So I'm now going to pass over to Heather. And if you've got a pen and paper, this is where you probably want to take notes, because Heather's going to talk about the specifics of the admission rather than more general as I've been doing. Over to you, Heather.
Perfect. Sounds good. Yeah, write down your questions. Definitely, I'll share our email address at the end of the session as well. And if there is any doubt, there is definitely a lot more information on our website as well that will explain most of what I'm going through right now in kind of a quick fashion. So we'll just go through the first thing. So Dr. Clark had mentioned that we are Western Canada's veterinary school, but we have had a change with Alberta no longer funding seats at the WCVM. So what we have here is a breakdown. The two terms that you see there, IPA seats and non-IPA seats. Basically what that refers to is IPA is interprovincial agreement, which is agreement we have with our partner provinces. So these seats are heavily funded by those provincial governments, and tuition for those seats is what you've probably typically known vet school to be, about $12,000 or $13,000 per year. And so the number of seats we have for each province is based on what the provinces want to fund. So out of BC, we accept 20 students into first year, Saskatchewan, 20 students. From Manitoba, we take 15. We have 2 seats for education equity, which is self-identified Indigenous students. And then we have 1 other seat, which is for the territories. And so the non-IPA seats that have basically come on board in the last couple of years since Alberta has withdrawn funding is they're not provincially funded. So the tuition for those is quite a bit more. It basically has an additional $55,000 non-IPA tuition amount to it, which probably sounds atrocious. What we, and it is, I'm not going to downplay that. It is a huge debt load that students are incurring going through vet school. What it might help to know though is that it actually is right in line with the international vet schools. So if vet students aren't admitted often within Canada, because they only have 1 school they can apply to, students do often look at going to, say, the Caribbean schools, Australia, UK, American schools. So the tuition there is very much on par with what you would pay if you were to go to an international school. And so we do have 20 to 25 seats reserved for Western Canadians in those non-IPA seats. There is a preference within those seats for students from our partner provinces. And then there is also allowance for Alberta students to apply for those seats. So we are still a partner with Alberta, as we took the last group of Alberta students in funded seats in 2019, I guess. And so those students, of course, for the next 4 years are still in the program, and we still definitely have a working relationship with Alberta, and those students can apply for the non-IPA seats. And then the new territory that we've just moved into is the international pool. So this fall will be our first year that we will accept up to 5 students from the international pool. That may fluctuate a little bit, really depending on the number of students that are interested from Western Canada in those non-IPA seats. So the total number that we expect to see is probably 25 to 30 non-IPA seats, but how that breaks down exactly with our partner provinces, Alberta and international, will fluctuate a little bit just depending on what interest is there. So our selection criteria when it comes to admissions, regardless of which seats you're applying for, it's going to be the same across the board. So the academic is the first thing that we really look at. I'll go through on the next slide just the prerequisites in a little bit more detail. But what I always like to stress to students is that the prerequisites are requirement to be met, but they don't have a weight in our academic score that we use. So our academic score actually focuses on your overall average, which is all the courses you've ever taken in university. Of course, your prerequisites will be included in those, and then your best full year of university. And the weighting between those two averages is 2/3 of the weight is on your overall average and 1/3 of the weight is on your best full year. The minimum average that you need to have is a 75% to be able to apply. And I know that the Manitoba schools are on the letter grade. So generally speaking, that's about a B average when it comes to converting grades. But if you do have more questions about how the grades convert, we have an exact scale of each letter grade and the percent that it's assigned in our process. So it is that academic score, though, that is used then. So essentially what we have, I'm going to talk mostly in the context of Manitoba right now. With the 15 seats, for example, that we have, we'll get our applications each year. We first go through the residency and make sure everybody meets the Manitoba residency. The second thing then that we do is calculate this academic score for each applicant. And we usually have, I'm going to say, between 50 and 65. It really fluctuates up and down from year to year. People apply from Manitoba, and this academic score will be calculated, and we come up with a descending order from top to bottom of Manitoba applicants. And then we will offer interviews based on that academic score. So 2 people are offered interviews for each seat that we have. So essentially 30 interviews will be granted to Manitoba applicants. And then from that point, the non-academic comes into play. So unfortunately, if you fall at about the number 40 position and haven't been granted an interview for a seat, then your interview and references the non-academic component doesn't come into play at all. So we don't do a full review of your animal and vet experience and so on. And so it's these 2 scores, the academic counting 60% and the interview and the references counting 40%, that then decides which of the 30 people are offered admission as the top 15, for example. As mentioned, so there are prerequisites. 60 credit hours or 60 credits are required, which is 20 one-term courses. More specifically, 39 of those credits are really specific: biology, chemistry, genetics, and so on. And then there's 21 credits of elective courses. Those electives can be any subject area at all, as long as they're university level courses. We do stress that students are picking a backup plan, and really that those electives will probably be driven based on what your major or your degree is. In reality, there are very few students that get into veterinary medicine with just 2 years, even though that is possible to do. So I think about 10% of the first year class comes in with about 2 years of pre-vet, but the majority of students do have 3 or 4 years of university before they come in. So having that backup plan or degree that you're working towards is a natural progression. Then if you do apply after your second year, if you're not accepted, then you continue with your degree. And in the end, if you aren't unfortunately accepted after even 3 or 4 years, you do have a degree done. So the one thing I'll say about backup degrees is there is a bit of a misconception, I think, that we have a preference for students coming from an animal science or an agriculture background. In reality, we see probably almost an even split of students between an animal science versus a science background. There's also a handful of students, I've just been looking at some interesting applications because we're just processing our current ones, and we have everything from pharmacists to MDs to engineers to business people. So there's a handful of very atypical, non-traditional backgrounds, second career people that are looking, to get into veterinary medicine. So there isn't a right or wrong career path. It just probably, if you're looking at the fastest way to get all the prereqs done, definitely being in a science or a agriculture program does make the most sense that way. The one comment I'll make is, so we do have, as you saw in our formula, 2/3 of the weight on the overall average and then 1/3 on the best full year. We're starting to see a little bit more part-time studies in applicants, and some concern with how that doesn't prepare a student very well for the heavy course load that they're facing in vet med. So we have put the language in that it's very specific now that a minimum of 2 full years of 24 credits, so that's 4 courses per term, is required to apply. We prefer to see students take a 30 credit year at least once before they come into veterinary medicine, just because of the demand of the program. Just to give you an idea, first year vet med, I think, is about 43 credits. So it's a big jump up from even a 30 credit course load. But as I stated here, next year, 2 24 credit years will be the minimum requirement, not just one as what you could apply right now with. So the references, every applicant who applies requires two references, pardon me. One has to be a veterinarian. The second person can be anybody from an animal or an agricultural related background. You can have two vets, that is definitely fine. The reference form is very specific, so if you probably can't read it very well on the screen there, but there's a link to it on our website. So as you're choosing your references, definitely feel free to have a look at the form and make sure you're selecting people who know you well enough to sort of tick all the boxes on that form. And then that process, February 15th is the deadline each year for the references to submit with your application, the references. So a bit about the interview. So as of last year, the pandemic caught us off guard, and we've never in the history of veterinary medicine done online interviews, but that's made us revisit that very quickly for obviously safety reasons. And I think it was actually quite successful. I must say that our interviewers were all at home. It was still the panel of 3. It was still a 45-minute interview. We moved them all a little bit later. They're in May. We still kept the same representation. So we have 2 members of our WCVM admissions committee. We have a rep from each provincial vet med association that's on that. And so everybody, we use the WebEx platform. This year it'll either be WebEx or Zoom again. And as I mentioned, there's 2 interviews granted for each seat that we have in each pool. So the qualities that are looked at in the interview are the same as what we always have done. So the 2 green boxes there are sort of I'll say the emphasis of the interview, definitely your animal related experience, your insight into the veterinary profession. When it comes to the interview score, 2/3 of the score is is allotted to those 2 areas. And then 1/3 of the score is the other areas that you see up there. So communication skills, leadership qualities, maturity and motivation, as well as your community involvement. So we are looking definitely for a well-rounded person, but what that is going to look different for every single person. There isn't a list or a cookie cutter sort of what you should be doing. I usually tell people that once you get into first year veterinary medicine, I think Dr. Gism and Dr. Clark can probably talk a bit more about their classmates, but there's a variety of people. There's the sports people, the musicians, you name it, the hard science, the soft science, like everything in that program. So when it comes to even thinking about the interview, please don't try and think, what does the vet school want to see in me? It's what are you going to follow naturally for yourself? And that's going to be the best method to, expand these other areas. So this is just a quick grid to give you an idea. I know that there's also a misconception out there that veterinary medicine, I quite often hear, is harder than medicine to get in, and you can have a 90 average and not get in. That is definitely possible. What I don't think you understand is that you can actually have, above a 75 average. Probably 75 isn't competitive for our provincial seats. I think high 70s into 80 is what is required. But what this grid is just showing you, or this table here, is I've highlighted a couple lines. Forgive me, because it is our Saskatchewan data. So you'll see 40 applicants, but the bold number in the black down the left is how these students ranked 1 through 40 based on their 60 points in their academic score, which is the red number there, and 40 points allotted to their interview score. So those are summed together in their total score. What I'd like to point out the comparison is if you look at their academic rank, so that's how these people had ranked that one, the middle column there, 1 through 40 before they had their interview offer. So you'll see number 1 stayed in the number 1 position, but on the green line, for example, that person, you can see their academic rank was number 36. So they're at the bottom end of the applicants based on their academic score to be interviewed. Their interview score was 35.2 out of 40, which is a very strong interview. And they moved themselves up basically 23 ranked positions into the top 15 or 20, pardon me, to be accepted. On the flip side, it is possible that the almost number 1 rank, or number 2 rank in this case at the red line there, is offered an interview, but their interview didn't go near as well and pulled them down to 24 rank. So basically what I kind of remind people is that's the person who probably has gone back into the pre-vet world and created a bit of this misconception that yes, 90% isn't high enough to get in. But what you don't hear about is the person who was number 36, who's probably about an 80% average, who did get in. So just to give you a picture there is definitely you know, a lot of the diversity, the interview reshuffles completely the order of the students that apply. The other part I'll just give you for information is that once you have had an interview, we collect feedback as much as we can from our interviewers, comments, and those do go into a letter to give you suggestions as to where you might improve for next time that you apply. So if you're really, all of your pre-vet and your animal experience has been exclusively cats and dogs, for example, then they're probably going to suggest that you expose yourself to maybe the agriculture side or food animal side, or explore another area of veterinary medicine, and so on. So we do try to, maybe it's communication skills, but any of that kind of information is given back to students so that when they apply again, they hopefully can improve their interview score. So just a quick timeline. So December 1st is our application deadline each year. And that is all an online application form. So that's for the following fall entry. And then we have supplemental information such as the transcripts, the references that are due throughout the application year. Transcripts specifically are due at the end of January and May, but that's all information is on our website. Our interviews do take place usually late or April into early June. I think this year we're actually the first week of May and the third or fourth week of May, right after the long weekend, that we'll be holding all of our interviews. And then our offers are usually made by mid-June. So it's a bit of a tight timeline. Our classes start mid-August each year, but it gives you a couple months to relocate to Saskatoon and get set up for the year. So now my last slide is just Q&A, but I think I'll just skip over that and let Dr. Chisholm move into her presentation, and we'll cover all the questions at the end. So I'll just stop sharing.
Sure. Good. And you can hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, sounds good. Lindsay, what amount of time I can kind of tailor the talk depending a little bit on the timeline. What's my time allowance, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, you have for sure a good 15 minutes, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so for sure 15 or so, but yeah.
Okay, sounds awesome. Okay, I'll try and share my screen here. And you guys can tell me if it works here. Good. Is that looking okay on that side?
Perfect.
Excellent. Oh, great. Okay, good to go then. So for my part, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of insight into my own story as a vet, kind of where it started. For me, it's quite a journey, quite a path to get to the point that I'm at now. We won't focus too heavily on everything that Heather just went through, all of those details, but certainly questions about my own experience at the end, I'm game to answer. So, as you know, my name is Dr. Bronwyn Chisholm, and I'm a veterinarian here in Winnipeg. This is a fairly recent photo of me, so I've got quite a few different hats at this stage in my life. So veterinarian, we own our own practice, which we recently opened up. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then mom and wife, we've got actually 4 kids. There's 3 in this picture, but we had another one enter the picture last November. So lots of things going on. And that's probably one thread in my story, is that this is a profession that you really can have a lot of different things going at the same time, and it can work really successfully for us. Having a family in the midst of all of this is a really doable thing. So that's me right now. So my story began in BC. I was born in Squamish, BC, and from there we moved to a number of different really remote locations, the northern aspect of the Queen Charlotte Islands, now Haida Gwaii, a little island close to Bella Bella, inland to Bella Coola, which is pictured here. And some of my earliest childhood memories are actually of my mom, who is a very accomplished equestrian athlete, giving us riding lessons, my siblings and I riding lessons on the driftwood that would come in from the ocean onto the beaches close to where we lived. So it's interesting reflecting back, and I would agree totally with that comment I think Heather made, that most veterinarians, we come to this profession really young. And for me, I would say that love of animals started even before I owned any. My early childhood, really that love of nature, the outdoors, the industriousness that it requires, those seeds had been set. And again, at the time, I didn't realize it, but there's a lot of correlation, I think, in large animal practice that there is living in those remote locations. If you're not quick on your feet, if you're not able to problem solve, you can run into some pretty significant consequences really quickly. And that's the case in those really isolated places. It's also the case in large animal medicine, where it's potentially just you and a farmer, and things can go wrong really quickly. Safety can become tricky fast. So things like a cow hip locked in a chute, a loose fence post, and a cow with a prolapse, and you need to somehow be able to fix the cow safely, keeping yourself safe and the farmer safe. And that sort of resourcefulness, I think, looking back, probably started in these really early years for me, which has been interesting reflecting on. When I was 10 years old, we moved north to a small beef and hay farm, and our land bordered the large animal veterinarian. So again, it's interesting how I think it is that example, I think Heather said it maybe, where you get to see a veterinarian in action, and then all of a sudden your dream kind of becomes a reality. You realize this is the vision I have. And so for me, definitely having our farm border the large animal veterinarian was where those seeds that had been sown on the coast really started to come to life. And for me, I looked at this profession, and there was so much that was combined in it. My love of nature and agriculture, working with these large animals. In my case, that's where that love was really born. That danger aspect that keeps it very exciting, at least again on the large animal side, where you really need to be competent and pretty capable moment to moment. And then also being able to use your brain at the same time. As I looked at other professions throughout my kind of teen years, there was none that combined all of the package, where you're so actively using your hands, you're so actively involved with agriculture, working as a team with your clients, but then also you're really using your brain at the same time in a way that's pretty intensive. It's also, as I mentioned, a profession that is really doable with a family. And that was the other thing that really led me into this profession. I knew I wanted to have a family one day. And this was a profession where I would be able to do that. And that's definitely proved true. I think our kids, for the first few years, they always have a skewed image of what the animal world is. I think our kids think all cows come with C-section incisions and all dogs and cats come with IV ports. And then slowly they learn that there's actually healthy animals out there, but they're very much a part of this profession, a part of our job, and certainly a part of our clinic. And so that hope that I had in this profession has totally played out, which has been wonderful. The next number of years, once that dream was really born, and that was the vision that I had, which, like I said, started super young for me, then it was on to hard work. So you need to put in the time and effort academically. You need to get that experience and that exposure professionally, both to get a sense if your dream, if you're on track, if what the vision is on track with the reality, and then also to set yourself up for success. And so that's really what the next number of years were. And then it was on to university. So I won't talk specifically about the stuff that Heather just covered in terms of admission requirements. More what I'd like to cover is my thoughts on what an undergrad degree can bring to your profession, and my own experiences with it, because I think that sometimes an undergrad degree can just be looked at as a stepping stone from kind of where you are to where you want to be. And I think what's missed is that this is a tremendous opportunity, a time for opportunity to set yourself up to be an even more accomplished and well-rounded veterinarian and gain skills that you otherwise might miss out on. Vet school is already a long program. There's no way that it can cover every topic out there. And so my advice would be don't miss the opportunities that your undergrad presents. So for me, I just lived and loved agriculture. For that reason, there was really no question that I would go into an agriculture degree. I certainly never thought about it as, would this give me an edge up in terms of applying? That didn't cross my mind. But for me, this was my passion, and there was nowhere else that I would be able to start living out that passion as quickly as doing an ag degree, specializing in animal science. And I would have to say that I gained a ton from this program. I did do it at the University of Saskatchewan, in their agriculture program. And especially when I was a mixed animal practitioner, the skills I gained, the experience, the exposure, nutrition, a lot of those things came into play in mixed animal practice that if I hadn't sort of seized those opportunities, I wouldn't have been able to be as well-rounded a veterinarian. And so my advice to you as you're at the beginning of your education is pick an undergrad that you are passionate about. If you have a direction that you think your vet profession will go in, that you want it to go in, is there some way you could make your undergrad make you even more solid and capable once you get into that veterinary world? Use it to set that foundation. No one likes to hear this side of things, but I will say it anyway. I so concur that having a backup plan or an off-ramp set into your plan, I think it's really worth doing. And I certainly looked at my undergrad degree in light of that. Would my undergrad degree on its own stand up? Would I have jobs that even if I wasn't as passionate and in love with, would I still would I be able to find work that I could find fulfilling and enjoy? And certainly an ag degree, you're going to find lots of opportunities. I had lots of job offers before I'd even graduated. I didn't end up finishing my ag degree. I got in after 3 years, but I knew this was an undergrad that would set me up for success. And it's not a secret that vet med is a tough program. It's a long haul. Not everybody makes the cut. And so making sure that you've got some opportunities with your undergrad alone, I think it's really wise. My dad always says, and I think it's a good motto to live by, it's so important to shoot for the stars. Don't limit yourself. Don't think you can't do it, because if you work hard enough, you probably can. But at the same time, be a realistic optimist. And so that's where I think really considering your undergrad is an important point. The other neat thing I think about undergrads is it builds in a period of time where you can continue to assess this career path. As I said, vet med it's a tough program. The 4 years are intense. The job itself is intense and it has lots of ups and downs. And so this undergrad time is a wonderful opportunity to look at all the different options that are out there. Try and get into a veterinary clinic if you think that private practice is something you might like. Get on a farm if you think that mixed animal practice or large animal practice might be for you. And you've got those summers between your years, and take full advantage of them. Research is incredible. And I think while I really felt at the start of my undergrad degree that I wasn't called to research, I did spend a summer in research. I worked in the lab setting in the ag college, and it gave me huge insight into where those papers that I still will pull and read, like, where did they come from? How did those grants come about? What goes on in the lab setting? And it's given me a respect for research. And it also helped me to see that I was totally on track. Research was not my calling, and I could move forward with a lot of clarity and confidence into the vet field. I didn't have any lingering sort of questions. Was I supposed to do research? What was that world about? So again, just utilize your undergrad experience. I would counsel you, if you can find a mentor or somebody in the profession to speak to, candidly, I guess. It's easy to not be totally sure, is the vision in your mind actually reality? And so finding that mentor who can tell you the highs and the lows, the tough spots, and then you can look through those difficult kind of components of the industry and decide, are they a big deal for you and you need to take that dream in a different direction, or is this completely doable and you're just going to thrive in that environment? So I would say my overarching theme with undergrads is just seize the opportunities that come, do something that you love, get that foundation for moving forward into the industry, and then look at all the different options so you can do that with a lot of confidence. This is just some pictures. That's me doing a pyosurgery just out of school, and kittens that were abandoned and we had in the vet clinic for a while till we found homes. And again, we have a lot of students that come through both our practice now and then when we were in Alberta or Saskatchewan. And sometimes this picture is exactly what they have in their mind, and they're just on fire at the end of a time in a clinic. And then for others, it becomes really clear that this is not what they're after. And so just again, gain that clarity. So for me, the next chapter was WCVM. I was accepted into the vet school after 3 years of my undergrad. My husband did 4. So again, I think it's really normal to have to do at least 3 or more for, I certainly had classmates who had done a master's before they got into the college. For me, it was 3 years of my ag degree. And vet school was a grand adventure. It is a pile of work, but there's nothing quite like it. You will never be around these sorts of cases again. Most likely, you'll never have that intensity. You'll never be around so many people who can help you, so much expertise really in one place. And I just had a blast with it. It's an amazing profession. I made amazing friends. And then most significantly, I would have to say, I met my husband there. So really for me, as I look at my life, all aspects have been impacted by vet school. I got to join this amazing profession that's taken us on so many adventures that I never saw coming, lasting friends, and then a husband and 4 kids, 4 of our own mini vets. And I'll just interject, Lee is actually, his dad was a vet for 40 years, the mixed animal practitioner. So he's 2nd generation. So if any of our kids become vets, we'll be at 3rd generation. So we'll see if we can inspire them enough that this is just a super cool profession. So right out of school, we knew that we wanted to start our own practice at some point, but I think there's a good period of time that has to be building your own expertise, your own competencies as a doctor. And so right out of vet school, we went into mixed animal practice rurally. So as Dr. Clark mentioned, we literally saw everything. So cattle, equine, pocket pets, dogs and cats, llamas, alpacas, the whole 9 yards, anything that came through the door or we got a phone call for, we were up. The first position I had, I was the first woman to ever do large animal in that area, which was, I never really thought about it. It was a wonderful opportunity. I really enjoyed breaking that ground and being able to go from being an unknown entity and through consistent, really good quality veterinary care to become a wonderful team with the producers in that area. I just loved it. We still keep in touch with a number of those producers there. They were just great and a wonderful first position out of vet school. This is a case I thought I'd throw in, not for the faint of heart, obviously. This was one of the emergency cases that I dealt with at that same practice that I had just mentioned. And this was a horse that had been chased through a barbed wire fence by a cougar. And what's interesting is when I look back over these pictures, I thought at the time this wound was really small because I just treated a draft horse, a half draft that had tried to shell off its front leg over a panel. And as anyone who's done anatomy knows, there's no joint in that front limb. And so you actually can separate the front limb from the body wall. So when I got called to this particular farm, I remember saying to the farmer, it's not a big deal. It's a really good spot. There's good drainage and we'll get everything healed up. And by the end of the summer, that lower picture, the horse was pain-free and totally usable as a trail horse. And these are definitely the things I miss now that I'm not in large animal practice. You just don't see that sort of thing. I also don't do -40 farm calls anymore. So there's a flip side. I don't see the cool stuff. I also don't freeze to death on farm calls. So there's pros and cons, but an interesting case. I also did some small ruminant medicine. And I actually remember Dr. Clark lecturing on small ruminant medicine when we were in vet school and thinking, that sounds so neat, but I probably, that's probably not what I'll end up doing. And that was an interesting situation where there were 3 vets at the practice, my husband being one of them. And I went out, and while I was gone, a vote took place, and I was voted the small ruminant veterinarian in my absence, which I thought was not very fair because the other vets didn't want to do it. So when I came back, I was the small ruminant vet. And there hadn't been somebody in the area who'd put in the time and effort to do small ruminant medicine before. So I actually gained a lot of clients really quickly who were really excited that I was the small ruminant vet. And my biggest goat producer had 500 head of goat. So a fairly large farm really in terms of goat numbers, I would say. And again, I didn't expect my career to kind of go in that path, but it was a blast. It was great. I learned a tremendous amount. I loved being such an integral part in their production systems, being able to see those farms really do better, start to flourish, those flocks do really, really well. And again, it was just an opportunity that came and you jumped at it and it was great. When we moved to Saskatchewan, I did a number of regulatory work cases. And again, I didn't expect this to be a part of my professional life. I'd really had strictly kind of large animal in my head or maybe mixed practice. And so already, even just a few years out, there were a lot of things that were happening that I hadn't expected. And regulatory work was certainly one of those. And it taught me a lot about how much credibility we have, our profession. You're a doctor at the end of it. You have a lot of education. You have a lot a lot of ability to assess, to make assessments. And with that comes a lot of responsibility. And I was called as an expert witness on a court case. Again, not something that you kind of have in your mind that you're going to be the expert on these regulatory cases. So I got a lot of insight into how an expert, which a vet is considered an expert in these cases, and the legal system really fit together. The other thing that I came to realize quickly with these cases is how many of them are not cruelty cases. They're a lack of understanding. They're people who don't realize what they're doing. They don't realize what they're not doing. And so a lot of it came down to education. How quickly could I go into a situation, make an assessment to try and figure out, is this cruelty? Is it neglect? What's actually going on here? And how do I make this have a positive outcome to the best of my abilities? And that really came back to communication. So it's interesting that's one of the qualities in the interview process that you mentioned, Heather, because right out of school, you're working with people. The people have animals. The animals don't come to your door without a person. The regulatory cases were really about working with the people to try and fix the animal situation. And there was one case where I'd been out to this particular location 3 times. Each time we went, it got more and more volatile. We had another RCMP officer added kind of to the group that were going out there. And on the 3rd visit, I knew like I needed to seize the animals, that it needed to end. And the RCMP knew that too. There were 3 of them there, the animal protection officer. And I went in and I just spent half an hour. I just talked. I just tried to tell this individual, this is what's going on. This is why we're really concerned. I'm going to show you on your animal why I know that this pet is in pain. And at the end of that individual looked at me and she said, I really think you need to take my animals. I think I can't take care of them. I need you to take them and make sure that they're taken care of. And I never had to say that I knew we needed to seize those animals. And she had so much pride that she'd made this wonderful decision for the betterment of her animals. I could see the police officers, the relief on their face. I was pregnant. I was really happy that it didn't escalate. And it was just a win-win. And so regulatory work was actually an amazing opportunity I really, really enjoyed. And I think probably the biggest example of how much power really we have to affect the outcome, good or bad, and to make a really wonderful impact in the lives of the animals and people around us. So don't pass up regulatory work if it comes. And then came the shift to small animals. So we were starting our family, and it was very clear, it's very, very clear when you're doing large animal medicine, that decisions that impact your own safety start to impact the safety of your family. And large animal medicine, it is tricky. It can be, Dr. Clark can probably concur, there are situations where you need to be incredibly fit and agile and able to deal with things. And so as we started our family, I made a bit of a shift towards the small animal part of those mixed animal practices. And certainly it was a bit of an unknown world to me. I'd really done a lot of large animal. That was my background. But small animal medicine, I came to learn really quickly, it's the same thing. In large animal medicine, it's you're the vet working with the producers towards their goal for their business, the welfare of their animals. You're the vet trying to help guide that towards that joint goal. And in small animal medicine, it's the same thing. You're working as a team, you and the client, towards the common goal of the longest, healthiest life for their pets. And so that dynamic of being a team with another person with something that they love deeply and are really committed to, it's the exact same aspect. And I loved it. I really enjoy high pressure situations. So I did pretty high level small animal medicine, very high standard of care, lots and lots of cases, a lot of emergencies. I've always done on call until moving to Winnipeg. I'd always done on call. So lots of emergencies, lots of urgent care, and a totally different shift, a much warmer shift, but just as much fun, just as much of a challenge, just a completely different environment. And so I would say have an open mind. Vet med is just so broad, and I had no idea all the things that would come up for me. And then 2019, so that dream that my husband and I had right out of school, an opportunity came up in 2018 and we jumped at it. And so in 2019, we opened our own clinic, Seasons Veterinary Clinic. So for those of you in Winnipeg, that's right near the Outlet Mall, that big new development by IKEA. And so it's been yet again a totally new shift for us. My husband continued as the lead veterinarian, and then I shifted very heavily into practice management. So hiring, training, mentoring. We have a lot of students that come and go, RVT students, some vet students as well. Got into a whole new world, advertising advertising, marketing, payroll, everything that goes into that. The one area that I've really held on to is anesthesia. I just love anesthesia. And so I'm kind of the vet that gets called in if we've got a high risk anesthesia. I'll actually reach out to the vet college. I stay in touch with Dr. Tanya Duke, one of the anesthesiologists there, and I'll bounce things off her if I'm not sure on a case. So I'm kind of straddling two worlds. So that's me today. I think I morphed into an octopus or something, but there's lots of irons in the fire. So my parting advice to you would be, see this as a profession where the sky is really the limit. We had no idea how many things would come our way. I've gone from doing large animal, primarily in those mixed animal settings, ruminant medicine, regulatory work, small animal medicine, equine medicine, lots of on-call emergency stuff. Now we're into business management. I think this is a profession where there are so many adventures that can come your way. All you have to do is jump at them. You just see them coming and you just jump. You can take it in any direction that you want, as we have. And I think the theme in veterinary medicine, and perhaps in many other industries too, this is just mine, is that we have so much potential to do good. We have so much potential to impact the lives around us, both animal and people. And there's really nothing like it. And I think you're considering a wonderful profession. And for me, I have no idea where our next adventure will take us. I doubt we're done. But it will be wonderful, whatever it is that comes. And so I really wish you all the very best as you contemplate this, and know that it's a pretty exciting world. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic to everyone that shared their thoughts. Dr. Clark, were you wanting to go next and share your experience as well?
Yes, I will actually. I just need to ask Bronwyn to stop sharing, and then I think
yeah. I can do that.
Thank you.
So excited and so rapid.
I know, and I teach my kids share all the time, so I'll just keep sharing.
Honestly, I think you may have inspired me to be a vet. So I think your kids, you'll have no problem. One of the four for sure.
All right. Well, hopefully you guys can see my screen. Perfect. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a double thing here. I'm going to talk a little bit about my career and my experiences as a veterinarian, but I'm also going to mix that with my experiences as the associate dean and working with students in the program, and talk a little bit about expectations and what being a veterinarian is really about, and some of the, not really the downsides, because I love my career, I love what I do, but I want to talk about perhaps taking off the rose-colored spectacles and looking at the career with a little bit more reality check in some respects. So, you know, I love being a veterinarian. I've been a veterinarian for 25 years. And I think every day I wake up and I'm grateful that I'm a veterinarian, even though perhaps I'm not a traditional veterinarian because I work in academia, but I really do love what I do. One of the things that I find interesting is the way that the world regards veterinarians. And I think right now, everybody's stuck at home with COVID. If you've got basic cable, I think it's technically possible to watch a reality TV show about veterinarians all day, every day. And I didn't really work to put this slide together. This was just Googling TV vet show, and this is just what you can get. So, you know, there are so many reality TV shows out there, and people love watching what vets do for a living. You know, probably a lot of your people in the audience here will recognize Dr. Kerry here. So Manitoba has its own reality TV show. Obviously, you know, when you look at stories about veterinarians, it really does go back to James Herriot and the All Creatures Great and All Creatures Great and Small TV show, which existed back in the 70s and has just been rebooted. So if you have access to PBS, there is a brand new version right in the middle there with the stories of James Herriot, which I still think really live in our background as veterinarians and really influence the way people think about veterinarians. Just as a plug, you may or may not have seen it on Animal Planet, but there is a show you can get called The Yorkshire Vet, which is about a veterinarian who used to work with James Herriot. Just as a plug, that's a classmate of mine. That's Julian. He and I went through vet school together. So there is this wide variety of things that purport to tell you about the life of a veterinarian. And they're great shows and they make for great television. But you have to remember, when you watch these shows and you watch dramas about veterinarians, there are editors involved. And so what they tend to do is they tend to pick stories that are dramatic and have good outcomes. And what these TV shows don't tend to do is to show quite as much of the mundane, routine life of being a veterinarian, which can still be incredibly satisfying, but it's not really a part of those shows. And they don't tend to always show some of the disappointments and some of the more difficult things that we deal with as a veterinarian. So as I talk a bit about my career, I want to try and highlight some of those things where expectations of veterinary practice line up alongside the realities of veterinary practice. So, you know, I, a little bit like Bronwyn, I was a mixed animal practitioner. I was completely focused on the large animal side of things, particularly agricultural production. I was in an incredibly rural area. If you've read the James Herriot stories, I was actually not that far away from where the James Herriot stories were written. I was working in a mixed animal practice that had very little facilities with some pretty old-fashioned farmers. You know, this picture was actually taken in the backyard of Skeldale House. So this is in the town of Thirsk. This is the backyard of the house where James Herriot practiced. And this is a statue of Alf White, who was James Herriot. So this is a statue taken at the museum that is now in Skeldale House in Thirsk. But as I said, my standard of practice was not that dissimilar from what James Herriot was really doing in the 1930s, which is kind of scary considering that this was the 1990s, but things really hadn't moved on much. And certainly the people hadn't changed. So I actually grew up in the south of England. I grew up initially in South London, and then we moved to a more rural area. My earliest memories, I think, are being at my grandparents, who lived next door to a dairy farm. And if I was really good, I would get taken down the lane and we would watch their neighbor milking the cows in the evening. That's pretty much my earliest memory. And I think that's where my interest in veterinary medicine came from. And certainly my interest in veterinary medicine was always tied up with agriculture and farming. And I should just add, I'm cautious about saying this, given that I'm talking to people in Winnipeg, but the area I grew up in is actually where Winnie the Pooh was written. So I actually grew up on the side of the 500-acre wood. And I always feel it necessary to point out that Winnie the Pooh comes from Sussex. Winnie the Pooh was named after a bear called Winnie from Winnipeg, but Winnie the Pooh we claim in Sussex. And so I grew up there. Again, a little bit like Bronwyn, I'm incredibly grateful to my father, because it was my father who said to me, look, if you're going to be a veterinarian, you need to know what you're getting into. You need to know what you're doing. So from the age of 14, I was volunteering in our local veterinary practice, which was a mixed agricultural practice. And so I was bugging the vet there. I got to know one of the vets there incredibly well. He was a fantastic mixed animal practitioner. I'm still in contact with him through my mother. And, you know, I used to go out on calls with him. I watched him do surgery. I learned a lot from him. I still quote him to our students, actually, because some of the things I learned from him, I still use. I also started working milking on farms. I used to make silage on dairy farms. I learned to drive a tractor before I could drive a car. I used to have to cycle to the dairy farm where I worked because I couldn't drive yet. But I really immersed myself in agriculture, and I think that really helped with my application to university. My veterinary training in the UK was a little different, because in the UK, you apply to vet school from high school. It's a 6-year program there. So I actually went to the University of Cambridge. That's where I did my veterinary degree. And then I ended up working as a mixed animal practitioner in a small town called Aspatria. Well, when you look at that, you're going to read that as Patria or as Patria. Given that it's the north of England and everything is weird, it was known as Spatria, is what the locals called it. And I just point on there that the town of Thirsk, which is Darrowby from the James Herriot novels, really wasn't that far away. You'll know if you've read the books that James Herriot's novels are set in the Yorkshire Dales, which I would count as the second most beautiful place on earth. He would probably argue with me. The most beautiful place on earth, as far as I'm concerned, is Cumbria and the Lake District, which is where I was practicing. So an absolutely beautiful area, an area of outstanding natural beauty. I worked on the north side of the national park. So this is the area I was working in. It's a beautiful agricultural plain. Right behind me when I took this picture is the national park. I'll show you a picture of that in just a moment. But I was working up there primarily with people who would count themselves as dairy farmers. So these dairy farmers had about 60 dairy cows. They would have a small beef operation, which meant they had about 100 beef animals. And then they all had a few sheep, by which I mean a minimum of 500. That was always considered a sideline. And then there would be the odd pig, there'd be chickens, there'd be horses, and they all had dogs and cats as well. So a little bit like Bronwyn described, I was doing absolutely everything, though my inclination, I'll be clear here, my inclination is to do the cattle work and the sheep work. I sort of had to get dragged into the other things. So a typical day for me there, I would start work at 8 in the morning. I'd go to the practice. We'd always have an argument about what was going to be done that day. One of us would stay at the practice to do small animal surgery. The others, initially there were 2 of us, latterly there were 3. The other 2 would get out on farm calls. You'd be out on farm calls all day. It was a strange time to be working there because cell phones were just coming in and the cell phone coverage was pretty iffy. So if the receptionist was trying to get hold of you, she knew where you'd be during the day. So she'd start phoning the farms and you'd be working out in the yard and someone could come running out from the house and tell you that you had to go somewhere else. That was the way of sort of contacting you at that time. Or depending on where you were, you'd try to check in by phone, or you'd literally stop and phone from a payphone to the practice to see where you were supposed to be next. It was kind of a slightly random way of doing things. We did our small animal consults in the evening. So we did a 1 in 2 or a 1 in 3 rota. If you were on call that night, you did the small animal consults, which meant the doors of the practice opened at 4 o'clock. We didn't have appointments and you stayed there until everything was done. They're just, some days there were 2 people in the waiting room. Some days there were 20. Some days you were done at 4:30. Some days you were there till 8. There would be emergency calls overnights and at weekends, cows calving, milk fevers, horses cut, whatever. It was an incredibly entertaining life. Lot of unknowns, lot of making it up as you go along, lot of variety, incredible community, very much part of the community as the veterinarian, building relationships. And so what I want to stress really, and I didn't really realize till I started working as a veterinarian, it's been said several times already, but people often talk about wanting to be a veterinarian because they love animals. Well, that's great. You have to love the people. The animals all come with people and you are going to have to work with people. You're going to have to counsel people. You're going to have to deal people when they're upset. You're going to have to deal people when they're angry. You're always going to be dealing with people in slightly abnormal circumstances. You're going to have to be prepared to work on the fly. You're going to have to adapt to the situation you find yourself in. There's a lot of uncertainty because when you're out on a farm with a cow, you don't have x-rays, you don't have diagnostics. You're going to have to make a decision and you're going to have to live with that decision. So if I decide I think a cow has a twisted stomach based on what I can hear with my stethoscope, I have to do the surgery. I have to do that surgery with the facilities on the farm. And I have to live with the fact that I get in there and discover her stomach isn't twisted. I'm going to have to explain that to the farmer. The other thing you have to be really aware of is that it is a money-driven business. Like veterinary medicine, if you want to take home a salary at the end of the day, you're charging for your services. People don't like parting with their money. So you've got to be prepared to talk to people about money, which people generally don't like doing. You've got to be prepared to justify what you're doing, either on a welfare basis or a business basis. you've got to be prepared to talk about money, because most veterinarians, it is fee for service. And the UK, like Canada, has a national healthcare program. So people aren't used to paying for medical services for themselves and their family. And a lot of people don't like paying for their dog. They don't like the fact that their dog's been hit by a car and there's a massive bill coming. And people can call you mean things, and people can say stuff that's hurtful to you because they're hurting at that time. And you do need to develop a thick skin. So this just sort of shows you in the upper right corner there. That was the practice I worked in the town of Sparetree, which is shown on the upper left there. A small town. The practice was right next door to the farm supply shop. It was across the road from the tractor dealership. I mean, it was about as agricultural as you can get. I actually lived in another small village, which is what's shown at the bottom here, right on the coast. So I lived in the small town of Silloth. That's the house I lived in. It was a practice building. So the ground floor was our branch practice, and I lived upstairs. So like people would bang on the door at 9 o'clock at night because something had happened to a dog. I mean, we didn't have the facilities there. I wasn't on call, but being a veterinarian in a small town, everybody knows who you are. If I went out to get a meal or I went to the pub, people would start asking me questions. You don't really get to clock off as the veterinarian in a rural practice. That's just the way it is. So this really was my life. This is me, fresh-faced in my 20s. This is what I spent a lot of my time doing. I was doing fertility visits on cattle. I was dealing with lame cows. I was dealing with sick cows, and I absolutely loved it. I dealt with anything that I got asked to see, because that's the nature of being a veterinarian. Probably the strangest thing that happened to me in practice was that the circus came to town. So the circus was in Silloth on the seafront, and I got the phone call. I had to see a lame elephant. So this is me and my boss in the tent at the circus with a lame elephant. Now, I don't know about Bronwyn, but we never got the lecture in vet school about how to deal with a lame elephant. So she was obviously lame. She picked her foot up on command, so I had a look at her foot. I felt it. I'd never felt an elephant's foot before, but it was apparent that they have these big toenails, and one toenail felt kind of warm. So I got my hoof testers from the horse kit and squeezed each toenail, and she really didn't like it when I squeezed the warm one. And there was a bit of discoloration there, so I grabbed a hoof knife and started digging, found the abscess, pus drained out. You know, I'm now an elephant expert. So we're trying to work out how to flush this out. And we're trying to work out how to get her foot in salty water. And then I suddenly realized we're like 20 yards from the ocean. So we walked her down the beach and walked her up and down in the ocean for a bit. And then I phoned another practice that was an expert in zoo animals and found out what to do in terms of drugs and that sort of thing. And so treated her, and she did just fine, but certainly not something you would have anticipated. I told you I would explain to you why the Lake District is the most beautiful place on earth. It's because it is. It is absolutely gorgeous. So a bunch of our practices were in the Lake District. So literally you could get out of your car and be treating sheep in a field, and that would be the view. It was the most gorgeous place on earth. And I had a fantastic time there. I really did enjoy my time in practice, but really two things started to happen. One, dairy practice in rural areas where there's not a lot of money being spent is pretty mundane. Like a lot of my days were fairly similar, and there were frustrations of producers that really didn't want to move with the times. So that was a frustration. The other thing that happened was I actually got quite badly injured. Bronwyn talked about the dangers of veterinary medicine. Oftentimes I'm by myself on a farm with pretty rickety facilities. I ended up getting a scalpel kicked through my left hand that really badly damaged my hand, which was going to impact my ability to work in general practice for some period of time. So at that point, I decided to do a career shift. I should just say, I always talk about large animals. I just want to be clear. I love large animal practice. I have nothing against small animals. This is the most recent addition to my family. This is a puppy. My wife and I, I'm also married to a veterinarian. That's something Bronwyn and I have in common. We have 2 dogs, 3 cats. This is Harvey. He's a rescue that we have. Like a lot of other veterinarians, I don't have a picture, but our other dog has 3 legs. That seems to be pretty standard for veterinarians. But I moved to Western Canada and I moved to the university here. And this was a major career shift. So I became an academic. And I think my career as an academic has really had 3 components. So I did advanced training in large animal internal medicine. So I trained basically to find out more about high quality practice specifically to large animals. So that's mainly cattle, horses, sheep, and goats. And so I see referral cases and first opinion cases. So I see some sort of specialist cases and tend to do things that practitioners in the field wouldn't do because we have the resources and the facilities here. I did get involved in research. I find it interesting, but it doesn't really turn my crank as an academic. Research isn't the thing I absolutely want to do, but I certainly have done research. I got a PhD in pharmacology. I've done work on cattle lameness and epidemiology. The thing that really surprised me, though, was the thing that I actually really love in veterinary medicine is teaching, which is something that I would have never considered at any time earlier in my career. But I think my real passion is for teaching the next generation of veterinarians. So that's really unusual, I think. Well, not super unusual, but it certainly was unexpected for me. And so getting really interested in how we teach better, how we make sure that students are learning what they need to know. And that's really been the career that I've been in now. I love working with young veterinarians. And certainly it's given me a lot of insights, which is why I was stressing some of those things, that veterinary medicine is a great career. It's an incredible profession, but you need to come at it with your eyes open. And I think that's why I'm so proud of our admission system, focusing on your experience of working with veterinarians, because, you know, again, being a veterinarian has some of the best things that you can get from a career, but you don't get those without some potential downsides as well. So certainly long hours, being on call, dealing with emergencies, seeing people on potentially some of the worst days of their lives when their animal is diagnosed with illness or you have to euthanize an animal unexpectedly. Dealing with people when they're going through grief. You all know about the stages of grief where people are angry, where people can't accept what they're being told. And oftentimes you're the person that they're going to take it out on. So you do need to have a thick skin and you need to be inventive, because you're going to learn in vet school, this is the way you ought to do it. But when you're a practitioner, the circumstances are often very, very different. So, I mean, certainly in my life as a large animal veterinarian, it's great to be told this is how you do surgery in a vet school. But I'm in the middle of a muddy field and it's dark and I'm going to have to invent another way to do it. Just as an aside, one of the things I can tell you from personal experience, car headlights do work as surgical lights, but you need to be careful with the cow, because certainly one time I did that when the cow got loose. She ran at the car, she jumped on the hood of the car, put her feet through the windshield and tore the wing off the car. So that was a really interesting insurance claim. So, you know, it is a great profession, but I encourage all of you who are thinking about it to get experience, like work with veterinarians, work with different veterinarians, and open your eyes to everything that is going on in the practice and ask yourself, you know, is this where I can see myself? And is this something that I am going to enjoy and get satisfaction from? It is an incredibly varied career. I know both Bronwyn and myself were practitioners and mixed animal practitioners, but there is a lot to veterinary medicine. There are specialist centers, there's regulatory, there's research. There's a lot of options within veterinary medicine. But as I said, most people are drawn to it because of the general practice component, and that is where most people end up. So I think I'm going to end there. And what I would like to do is, hang on just one second. I've got to get myself out of my sharing option here. And then we'll open it up to some questions. Just give me a second. I'm having trouble. Oh, there we go. I'm so used to the other
Platform.
programs that I'm having trouble getting out of my sharing option here.
If you hover toward the top, you should have an option that'll a little drop down box that will come and it'll say stop share.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. It's not
If you
coming.
go toward the top of your screen, it's kind of hiding and sometimes until you hover over.
Yeah, it's not. Hang on a second. Let me just.
I can actually stop it for you if you'd like.
I may need to get you to do that because I'm having some. Oh, here, finally, I'm at it. There we go.
Okay. Great.
I've got too many screens and it kind of plays with Zoom. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, no worries, not at all. I'm no stranger to having some technical challenges myself.
Okay, so I think I think we're ready to take some questions if people, and again, I don't want to speak for the others, but I'm prepared to answer questions about my career and the veterinary curriculum. Heather and myself will talk about the admissions. Bronwyn, loved your presentation, and you've got a lot of things I'm sure that they would like to ask you about your career as well. So
For sure.
please go for it.
Yeah, if you're welcome to take yourself off mute, or as I mentioned, you can also use the chat if you want to type something in there. While we wait for anyone who's oh, perfect. Oh, all right, we don't need to wait. Okay, so we have a couple questions here. One is about whether if you have any advice or resources that you can offer for pre-vet students searching for a veterinarian to shadow during the pandemic. Obviously, COVID presents some unique challenges that obviously many vet clinics right now are not accepting volunteers. Are any of you aware of any opportunities?
Well, I will say, I think, I'll get Bronwyn to throw it in here as well, but I think that from my experience, Winnipeg presents a particular issue for anybody trying to get veterinary experience because it's a large city. You've got all of the pre-vet students are in Winnipeg and a lot of them are from Winnipeg. And so the practices in Winnipeg do get a lot of pre-vet students trying to get experience. And you've got really, really, really few opportunities for mixed animal practice. I think, thank God for Central, and those guys are amazing. Because I think almost every vet student that applies to WCVM has been to Central. And so COVID is making things more difficult. I'm hopeful with the rollout of the vaccine, we're going to start to see things normalize over the summer. But what I can encourage you to do is basically write to practices, reach out to practices. And the ace in the hole, really, I think, is if you've got family members who are not in Winnipeg, who are somewhere else, try reaching out to a rural community because those practices have been less impacted by COVID and they're generally a little bit more accommodating and you're going to get a broader experience. So if there's a way for you to get out of Winnipeg, I think it will change the dynamics of trying to find that sort of experience. But you are going to have problems in Winnipeg because it's been COVID central and because the practices are sort of overwhelmed by applicants. Bronwyn, I don't know if you've got anything you can add to that.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting hearing your perspective with what you're seeing at the vet college and the students that are coming in. Because as I said in my presentation, we worked in Alberta and a couple different places in Alberta and then Saskatchewan and then here. And there is definitely something different here. Alberta and Saskatchewan, we had an absolute pile of students come through the clinic. It was almost a quasi open door policy. That does not seem to exist in Winnipeg. We get a lot of people reaching out, as Dr. Clark just said. I would say we go through phases where we get an applicant a week for a volunteer position of any sort, from mopping the floors to getting in on the cool stuff. And when I sit down with them, the theme is that other clinics didn't even contact them back. There's been no response, which is really foreign to me coming from Alberta and Saskatchewan. I'm not totally sure. It must be what you're saying there. There's just an absolute ton of people wanting those volunteer positions. So I would agree totally with Dr. Clark. You need to do some cold calls. You need to reach out to clinics. There are a few. We always have, almost always we have a volunteer. Leah and I, my husband and I, really, as Dr. Clark just said, it's kind of, we see it as our responsibility and a real privilege to be able to help the next generation. We have a lot of RBT, so tech students do their practicums with us or get their 80 hours of volunteer time. They have to get that to apply. We don't, at least as veterinary students or pre-vet students, you don't have a requirement for a set number of hours. They do, and sometimes they cannot get into a clinic. So they can't even get an application in. So I would certainly say reach out to clinics around you, but bear in mind that it seems like in Winnipeg, you can't just decide, I live close to X clinic, so I'm going to volunteer there. You're going to need to reach out way further than what might be convenient. We have students who commute along like 45 minutes to volunteer at our clinic because from way out of town, because there was nowhere else that they could get into. So certainly you're free to reach out. I think, Lindsay, you have my email, so I'm certainly fine with that management email if you wanted to reach out. I can, the name of the clinic is escaping me. Central is a great place to go. As far as I know, through COVID, they're not taking any volunteers, but reach out to them. They're a good clinic. We do take, still through COVID, we take a limited number of volunteers. We don't take, we've really tried to pare it down to just taking those who are really, really serious. So that we're giving that spot to the people where it counts the most, not to kind of someone doing their high school volunteer hours, that sort of thing, like really try and commit to helping the students who need it most. Woodlands, that's the name. We have a classmate, Justin Rosings, up in Woodlands. They've taken a couple of the students who've wanted large animal experience. We've been able to contact him. So that would be a place I would try. And otherwise, just cold call, send your resume in and be willing to do anything. And you're going to get to see cool stuff, but it might be while you vacuum or mop, you're watching a surgery from a distance, but just cold call.
Great. You're a super multitasker, I have to say. I just want to be mindful of the time because I'm good to stay a little later because we are at the time period that we had specified. But I'm complete for a few more minutes if you're open to taking a couple more questions. Though I know you've got your hands full there, Ron.
I'm totally fine. Whatever. Yeah, I certainly have time.
Yeah,
okay.
I have time too, actually. So next question there is about surgery and specialization. So I didn't address this, but there is an opportunity to specialize. It's certainly something I did myself. So typically, you've got to do your undergrad, then 4 years of your veterinary degree. If you want to specialize, typically it's going to involve doing a 1-year internship. So at the end of your veterinary degree, you do a 1-year internship and then a 3-year residency. And so being an intern and a resident means you are a veterinarian, you are receiving a salary, but it's pretty minimal. And you're also a grad student at the same time. So it's long hours, it's hard work. You have to maintain case logs, things like that. And at the end of your residency, there are major exams in order to call yourself a specialist. So it's not for everybody. And it ends up being a very different type of practice. So it works well for certain personality types. But I think when you're a specialist, the way I look at it is a specialist treats the leg, right? They don't treat the whole dog. And they often don't really develop relationships with the client because they see the animal referred to them, they see it for this leg, and then it leaves. Whereas when you're a general practice veterinarian, you see that dog when it's a puppy, you vaccinate it, and you see it throughout its life, and you really build relationships with people. Also, when you're a specialist, you see a lot of the same thing all the time. You get to be very good at that one thing, but it can become quite repetitive. I mean, if you're a board certified surgeon in Western Canada, you're doing a surgery called a TPLO, which is a knee surgery. And you could literally just all day, every day do TPLOs. You wouldn't have to do anything else. So you get to be very good at a very small thing, but you lose some of the variety. I don't know, Bronwyn, do you have anything you wanted to add to that? Oh, you're muted still.
There we go. No, I would concur totally. And for some of us, for me, very much the variety is the spice of life. I wouldn't want to specialize. I'm married to someone who's incredibly detail oriented, and I think he totally could have become a surgeon. And becoming a perfectionist at any given skill is where he thrives. And he's, whatever Lee does, he's going to be really, really good at. And that's sort of the mindset that I think does well in a specialty of any sort, and surgery for sure. You get incredible at the one skill, or the few skills.
I will say, even though I'm technically a specialist, I'm actually much more of a generalist large animal guy. I don't tend to do very much of the high end. Like, I don't like having falls in intensive care units. That really doesn't do much for me. I actually like the more general side of things, having done both. Anybody else have any questions for us?
I might just take a moment here. If anyone has questions, if that's okay, I'll just gonna share my screen just for a moment, because I just wanted to direct everyone just to the resources that we have quickly, and I won't take up much time or anything like that. But just so that you know, I know a lot of our guests talked a little bit about what we call parallel planning, which Maeve referred to as backup plans. So we really help students to do some of that work, certainly, but also really to maybe explore ourselves, to learn more. I know that's been a common theme today as well, like get to know what you love, where is your passion, what are you interested in? So no doubt you've learned a lot about the career of vet medicine today. But if you're looking to, explore other options, we certainly can help you do that here in Career Services, and sort of, what educational pathways can help you to get there. Sometimes we're doing some of that parallel planning work where it's maybe, vet medicine is the goal, but what's the backup plan? What's the parallel plan? What else can we do to make ourselves really employable after that first degree and take advantage of some of the opportunities like Dr. Chisholm mentioned today, right? How can we make the most of that? I really love that theme that you mentioned about making the most of your undergrad and really seeing it as such a valuable opportunity. So we'd work with students really throughout your degree, from the day that you enter university and even before, up to 6 months after graduation. So we help students with a variety of services. We have a great website, all the help with employment support as well, or creating a resume, lots of workshops like a career chat like this, but also those related to employment. We do work one-on-one, and we do have a program called the Career Mentor Program, which may be helpful for those of you that are looking to meet with veterinarians who are practicing. So this is a program where we help facilitate informational interviews for students. So we'll actually find a vet who's in practice for you, connect you with them, so you're able to actually go and meet. Now, of course, prior to COVID, these would be in-person meetings. Right now, I would suspect primarily they would be all virtual at this point, but we hope to move back to those in-person meetings, which is of course super valuable to actually see the work. So it's not a shadow program, but it's an informational interview program. But it may be a good place to start for some of you that are considering this as a career. And we have a great occupational profile for vet, as well as many other occupations. So this might be a good starting point for you to explore, educational pathways, which degree potentially to do or to be enrolled in. Tons more information down the page. You can't click on it, it's a screenshot, but it will lots of information about the labor market and other relevant links, and might be helpful even for some of you that were considering vet as a career, to look at some of these other occupations on the right hand side. That might be related, and sometimes we have misconceptions because of TV shows or whatever it might be about the field of vet medicine. So finding good information, and this is information we've sourced and we know is credible, to explore the occupation further. So a lot of experiential exploring and research is important, as our guests have mentioned multiple times, and we are really big fans of that as well. But certainly, doing some solid research is important as well. So we do have lots of support to offer you guys as students to help you explore this career further. But I do encourage you, you have fantastic people right, at your disposal to ask questions right now. So I'll give another minute or so. If anyone has any questions, I'd encourage you to either unmute yourself or use the chat, and I can relay the questions certainly to our guests. I think I have a whole list of questions as well, to be honest, but you guys did such a fantastic job that I don't actually know if I have any left on there to ask. Really, your journeys were so complete, I think, when you explained sort of how you came to make your decision, and where you're coming from. So it was fantastic. I was so interesting.
Good.
Well, I don't see anything coming into the chat, so I suppose if no one has any questions, I do want to thank you for coming to today's session. I know I've really enjoyed learning and hearing from our guest speakers today, and I really appreciate your time. Do explore the Discover Your Future in Healthcare webpage to see if there's any other sessions that might be of interest to you. And of course, check us out on our webpage to be sure that you know where the resources are. So thank you so much for coming. And have a wonderful rest of the day.
Just a reminder, wcvm.usas.ca. If you go there, you can find the admissions page. You'll find links to the admissions email. You know, that's what Heather and her team do is answer questions. So don't hesitate to look at that resource and reach out if you have additional questions.
Yeah. Best of luck. Thank you for having me. This was really a pleasure. And yeah, I wish all of you the very best as you are starting your journey. So exciting.
Yeah, hopefully.